This is a statement, a vote of confidence, if you will, for the President of the United States. I don't think we can see it any other way, the election's tomorrow.
No, I think the White House is trying to say that this is not a referendum on Barack Obama. Of course this is a referendum on Barack Obama. Every midterm election is about the president who's in office. If people thought that things were going well, that the economy was on the right track, over 60% of the people believe we're headed in the wrong direction. If they thought things were going well, then they would say, okay, we'll keep the guys in power who are with Barack Obama. But they don't. They think Barack Obama promised to be a post-partisan president, that he didn't govern as a post-partisan president, and they're angry.
Is it more of a referendum on President Obama and his administration, or on the Democratic leadership in the House and the Senate, Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid?
That's a very good question, Wolf. And to some extent, haven't they morphed into one? And isn't that the problem for the president? That he's identified so closely because he turned over so much responsibility to Nancy Pelosi early on. I think it's coming back as a huge miscalculation among many miscalculations, so that they're really sort of tied in to each other. I think their fates are inextricably tied now through the course of this election.
I don't think you'd have a Tea Party if you didn't have health care reform.
Well, I agree with that.
Honestly.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that.
I don't think so.
I disagree with that. I think when you look at the issues that they've touted, when you talk about energy, when you talk about deficit, and then, of course, you also roll in health care. I mean, remember, there was significant frustration on the Republican side, and I see most of the Tea Party folks as Republicans or even very conservative Democrats. Wow. They had significant criticism of President George W. Bush, of the Republican-led Congress, as related to the spending that took place. And they simply felt it was exacerbated when President Obama came into office with various programs.
If this is a huge win for the Republicans tomorrow, Mary, will this be a vote against the Democrats or a vote of appreciation to the Republicans?
Well, the data is showing that it's a split, but it really is an affirmation for a kind of government, less spending, more limited, regulations that are clear and enforceable. And the Tea Party started not with health care. That was the...
Started with Jimmy Carter.
It started with the stimulus package. When we look back at the data, independents started leaving support for the president.
Maybe it started with TARP, with George W. Bush.
Well, whatever. But I think, I'd say, Mary, I think it's fundamentally a rejection election. I think it's a negative election, not a positive election. And the Republicans still have to earn the trust.
Correct. That is,
and the following.
Republicans still have a branding problem left over from 06, but they're in position to prove themselves. And it is an affirmation for all these Democrats that had to walk the plank, that they were all running on conservative principles, not Democrat or Republican, and they're all going to lose. What's going to be left of the Democratic Party? That's what I want to know.
Actually, I think the broader issue that you have to ask yourself is, will you see moderate Republicans after tomorrow night, and what will you see in terms of conservative Democrats? I mean, that's the real issue. So the question would be, are you going to have people who frankly go to their respective corners? Who will you have? I need you guys to come together.
He makes an excellent point, and let me let David Gergen weigh in. Some of the biggest losers on the Democratic side tomorrow will be those moderate or conservative, so-called blue dog Democrats who could wind up losing after many terms in the Congress.
And many of them were people who were dragged kicking and screaming to vote for the stimulus package, the health care package, and here they're the ones now going to walk the plank.
But even some of them who voted against all that stuff, they're going to lose anyway.
You know why? Because the ad is... Congressman X voted with Nancy Pelosi 80% of the time. It doesn't matter that they voted against health care or they voted against stimulus. But they voted with her on other things, and they're going to lose.
But Roland's right about the hollowing out issue and the hollowing out of the center as a result of this election and what happens afterwards. When the Democrats lose a lot of their blue dogs and the Republicans lose, or a lot of people get intimidated to go to the center.
Right. Yeah. And when you talked about in terms of those particular votes, also those same people who felt they were dragged along, they also appreciated being in power as committee chairman and also being subcommittee chair, so they didn't mind that. The question then becomes, if you don't have enough people there in the middle who understand compromise, then what are you left with? Are you truly going to have this whole notion of bipartisanship, which sounds great, but is it reasonable when it comes to actual passage of bills?
It's up to Barack Obama as much as it's up to the Republicans, because he needs to find a new narrative also.
Barack Obama. It's way more up to him. And I love all this chatter, and we say it all the time, bipartisan, going from the center. I'm not directing this to anybody. These are 70-30 issues. They're not extremist positions. 70-30 issues, cut spending. 70-30, taxes are cutting taxes
But
are more
when you say
stimulative
cut
than
spending, the question then becomes, what are you actually cutting?
Going
See,
to
that's the
David's
real issue.
point, okay, if I may, going to David's point, Republicans can't just say, we're for cutting spending, we're for limiting government. As our good friend Pete Wehner says, they have to responsibly step up to the plate, and they have, Paul Ryan and Boehner and those guys have plans to
but Paul
have
Ryan's
unspecified plans,
which talks about dealing with Social Security, was endorsed by 18 Republicans, Mary. So it's not like they're all jumping on board. Look, people look at a governing party very differently from the way they look at an opposition party.
Yeah.
And when the Republicans actually have responsibility to govern, if they're running the House of Representatives, they're going to have to find some middle ground, and it may work for,
By the way,
for them, and it may work for Obama.
Let me just update our viewers. Earlier, we were talking about John Boehner, the would-be Speaker of the House, criticizing the president for using the word enemies and discussing those who were criticizing him on the Republican side. In a new radio interview, we just got the transcript, the president says, yes, he should have used the word opponents instead of enemies. He says, I probably should have used the word opponents instead of enemies. Now the Republicans say I'm calling them enemies. So he's saying he obviously could have chosen his words better.
Opponents, I actually heard the interview where he said to Latinos, enemies of your issues. And so fine, whatever you want to call it, I think we all pretty much know what in the heck he's talking about. So it's not like, look, when you hear Republicans...
It's offensive.
It's offensive.
Oh, please. I mean, that's not
aggregates. It aggregates. Listen, when you go from bitter clingers to people are scared that makes them stupid to their enemies, it's all aggregates to, is he arrogant? Is he ignorant? Does he think we're stupid? Elite. That's, thank you. Thanks. That's the word I was
And when the people on the other side also make it perfectly clear that the most important thing they want to do is to stop you from getting a second term, fine, call it opponent, call it adversary, call it enemy. The average person out there knows exactly what that means.
But I want to come back to this very quickly. All the lack of confidence now in the leadership. It seems to me the Republicans will get a big victory tomorrow night. But for all politicians coming back to Washington, in effect, they're on probation. I don't think that there's a ringing endorsement for political leadership.
And let's not forget, after a ringing endorsement for the Republicans and Newt Gingrich and the contract with America in '94, 2 years later, Bill Clinton got himself reelected.
They tried to shut down the government.
Every election's a probation.
Just as a lot changed over the past 2 years, 2008 to 2010, who knows what will happen between 2010 and 2012.
That's why we have elections.
That's why we love politics.
Get all those things ready out there in the middle of the floor.
2 years.
And who knows what kind of new technology we'll have in 2012.
We don't have to be here next time. We'll just do it from the house.